this video, we're going to do a breakdown of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the fight between Aang and Zuko. So let's jump right into it. First shot. So on every shot, there's like the main staff and then all these ghost versions of the staff. And that's what's helping to create this feeling of like really quick movement. But then in real time, it has that really great effect. Something I found really interesting was the spacing on this. So each time you see a little marker down here, that is gonna be a different actual drawing. And as you can see, like the spacing is different in threes. And then special circumstances where it's like, hey, we're gonna do a lot of movement, but we don't want you to miss any of it. That's when I noticed that they go to ones. The other thing I thought was really interesting, it's kind of like a, whose turn is it? So if you notice Zuko over here, he's just gonna stay chill this whole time, whereas Aang is the one who's doing a lot of movement, and then it's kind of like your turn, then my turn. And this is actually a big thing that we're gonna see like coming up in the future clips that has really kind of like transformed the way that I understand still movement. This kind of blew my mind to see like, here's one frame of Aang coming into the screen. It's held for 3 frames. This is held for 1 frame, which is essentially the same drawing, but I think they just transformed it, like moved it from up here to down here. And then we have a new drawing for landing, which is the exact same face. Like a lot of it's the exact same, but just they like were really efficient with the drawings. And then we're on the ground in 3 drawings. And I think me in the past, I would have drawn, okay, I've got the legs, and then I would draw the legs a little bit more, and then I would draw the legs in a little bit more, and so on and so forth, doing every single frame. But instead, got the legs, we got starting to move, and we got landing. This is where I first really noticed how they make the action feel really snappy. And it's honestly like these huge movements all at once. But right here, boom, there's so much change in the movement. So for one, Aang's staff is going this way, and then in the next image, it's going the whole other way, which is really showing like how fast this character is, and he's able to like switch the direction up on the movement. And then we've gone from a kick all the way back here that's got some nice little motion blur down to this already fully flamed kick. And so that's gonna feel just so snappy. And then we gradually move out of the movement. But if we just were to watch this clip, boom, we feel that snappiness in there. Check this clip out. Okay, so we got this fire kick, and then Aang ducks out of there, right? There is this telegraphing of the fire kick. So the actual kick is like here, like this big bright spot, and then this big blast of flame. But the flame actually starts before the kick. And so this could technically be Zuko's powers, but I really think this is like telegraphing to the audience, this kick's about to happen, boom, big kick, and that just helps us feel it. This really is solidifying for me the telegraphing idea. Zuko's obviously rearing up to do crazy hit, and Aang is like, okay, I got you, I see you. But as Zuko is already starting to raise his leg up to do a kick, Aang is already starting to duck below this. This to me feels a little bit like too soon, like almost like how would he know, at that point already and already be ducking to go underneath and then move out of it. But this is where it comes into play that like choreographing fights is different than real fights. So being someone who does martial arts myself, like that was like, oh, that's weird to me. But in terms of thinking of stage fighting, hey, you don't want to hurt your partner, and real people choreographed a lot of these fights. And so they would have wanted to, do things in a way that communicates well, but also is safe. And so this right here, it's like, okay, we both know when you go to do the kick, I'm going to start ducking underneath, but in full fast motion, it's going to look really cool. And so this really kind of changed my way of thinking about fighting when it comes to animation and TV. And so if we give that a watch, pretty cool. So let's take a quick zoom into the timing on these frames. We have 1 frame, then right after the next frame, we're moving to this next movement. Then 1, 2, 3, we're holding this because we really want to see him about to attack. And we're already starting to see that Aang is this slippery guy who can get away. And then 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Anytime they switch to doing just 1 frame, a lot of times they're going to hold that next one for 3 because they're trying to show like this connective moment, this little frame. And then these 3 frames that they want you to feel a little bit longer. Here, we're just moving to the next pose. Now we're getting like a little breathing moment once we get to here. And then it's like, hey, Zuko's gonna hold, Aang is just moving. There's like that your turn, my turn idea that we return to. As we move into this one, so Zuko's mostly holding still, but just kind of slightly tracking where Aang's going. And then look at how big a movement. This is like the similar change as earlier when there was the staff and it was pointed this way and then it was pointed this way. And so for this, we got Aang pointing this way, and then boom, he's now flipped from this to now hitting the other way. And so that's why that feels so snappy. Wham, goof. Why do we do 1s versus 2s versus 3s? And right here, each frame is changing, but then we hold this one for 3 because it's such a cool like storytelling pose. I imagine that when they were doing the scene, for me, I probably would be like this one, and then maybe that one and that one. So 3 drawings versus 5 drawings. This part right here goes back to the telegraphing idea. They're both already moving, and before even knowing that Zuko's gonna do a high kick, Aang is already starting to duck below and then like bounce out of that movement. This is also where I started to notice that anytime the fire attack is happening, the whole screen starts to get this glow to it, which is really interesting. This next frame is actually really wild. There's lots of different ways of doing like motion blur, but this is one I hadn't seen before. Zuko with another Zuko, he's got multiple arms, multiple legs, and that's what's creating the feeling of the motion blur. Kinda crazy. But in real time, you only notice it's right because I mentioned it, and then I'm like playing it back over again. But if we were to go a little bit more in context, then it's really hard to notice that moment, right? Before we break down this kind of big explosion scene, I just kind of want to point out right here that, no offense to whoever drew this action scene is amazing. You did a great job. But in how fast the motion is, it's like the budget was not spent on making these faces perfectly on model and looking really good, because this does not look like Zuko to me. And this doesn't really look like Aang to me. But in the context of the scene, all I'm caring about is the movement of him being here and then hitting, and him, and then what they hit in the middle, and then all the crazy explosion that happens afterwards. Kudos to them for an amazing section of effects and impact and all this stuff, but it also just reassures me that I don't have to make every drawing perfect to make a good animation. Not that I don't want to try, I'm gonna try my hardest, but yeah, so it's just reassuring. Now we'll work on this explosion scene. One is this impact, this invert frame. This is literally like they took this frame and they inverted it in Photoshop so that it's the complete opposite of the image. And then we come back and that kind of slows out. But then we have a couple of these very like cartoony frames. And then it moves into, from this like cartoony moment to, okay, now we're seeing an explosion with some kind of background. And then we're zooming out. And again, like the turn taking, that even if you notice the explosion versus the background, like sometimes that drawing is staying the same. The camera's just literally zooming out, or they're very similar. And then it's like, okay, we zoomed out. Now you can make the explosion different. Going back to the cartoon images here, we kind of have a mirroring of that right here. That then takes us into, okay, now this is the next crazy version of the explosion, which is this is what we write out for the rest of the scene in a more expected way of how you think of an explosion. And so that kind of pans out nicely. And I actually really love how it goes from the background being really, really bright and overblown, and that helps us feel the explosion, and then that background slowly dims until we're at the regular exposure. It also just really taught me like the power of having those little impact frames that you feel them more than you can see them in the moment, but it does add to that impact. So if we watch this whole little explosion thing from the start, now that we know they're there, we can kind of see them. But in the context of the show, we're not gonna really know what's happening on those unless you are specifically looking out for it. Okay, so we got this little sequence here where Zuko is landing on the roof and Aang's landing on the roof. This roof background is gonna hold for 8 entire frames. It's a long time that we're just chilling on that picture. And then we have Zuko coming in, and if we think back to right here, we got Aang jumping into the scene. We kind of have a mirroring of that with Zuko. So not only in terms of like, maybe that was part of the storytelling of the scene, which I think would be really cool, but also in terms of like, we see him coming onto the frame for 2 frames, and then 1, 2, 3, and he holds for 2 more frames, and then he's gonna land, right? So just a few drawings that show him impacting on this roof. But one of the things I thought was really cool was right here, he has not yet impacted on the roof. He's still, you know, got this motion that's carrying him through. But then the next frame isn't him hitting the roof and then the impact happens. It's technically he's already exploded into the roof and things are already flying up and away from the roof, the debris. And I think that's part of what gives that feeling of impact on the roof. And so if we go back and look at that, not hitting yet, boom, he's already hit and things are already flying up. And so technically we're not even showing the actual moment that it happens, we're showing before and we're showing afterwards, which very much makes me think back to like comics where if they had, this is a fist, and they punched, and then they show like the character was actually hit over here. Now, the other part of what makes this have like a really strong impact, camera shake and blur. So the background is technically, when I think about how did they make this, the background is this one image. They're not redrawing the background. What they're doing is they're in like Premiere Pro or After Effects or TV Paint or whatever. They are changing the transform of the background in an interesting way. And then they're going in and out of blur. And then there's this nice, again, breathing room after this chaotic camera movement where all of a sudden, okay, we're gonna chill out with Zuko for a few more frames. And then we're gonna do the same thing with Aang. Director, storyteller wise, they probably hit the roofs around the same exact time, but we're gonna do my turn, then your turn. So we see Zuko, it's his turn to tell his story, and then boom, we're gonna have Aang's turn to show his action, which is the same thing where we're gonna hold on this roof for a good amount of frames before the impact and then after the impact, but we don't see the actual moment. And then we're gonna have that camera shake with the blur coming in and out, and then a few more frames to rest to really tell the story. Right, as I go through the frames right here for you, it feels like a long time, but if we just take that clip, like it's not very long, but those extra frames give us that time to take that story in. Okay, this is a great example right here of economy of drawing, not drawing more than you have to. So there's this nice little storytelling of, this hurt so much, it was really painful, oh my head. But once we get to, okay, right here, this frame holds for 12 frames. That's an eternity, half a second. And then right here, once we get into this face, besides this little blink, and even the shoulders, like there's very little movement after that. It's essentially the camera's doing the work of the movement. So we've got this face that's staying the same. They're not redrawing the face every single time. Instead, the camera is like digitally zooming in, and they're adding this blur and a little bit of a warp effect that kind of like makes us feel like the camera maybe is like zooming into it. But we can also see like this is the same drawing as before. The line work was the same size, and now that we're closer, we're able to see like a lot of the line work in there, like that human hand and those little wiggles and imperfections that are so cool, and so part of why animation is so amazing. And then this one technically is holding from here, and then we're zooming in, but then even afterwards it's holding for all these frames down here. Pretty fun. All right, this clip is really cool, and it took me a while to kind of imagine like how they did it, and I don't know if I'm right, but it's helpful to try and, the way I try and approach all these, I'm trying to really reverse engineer how they were thinking as they approach the shot. So for this one, I was like, okay, did they redraw the background every single time? That feels insane. So I don't think they did. I think instead they drew the background, so we've got our camera size, right? So if this is the camera size, background I think actually came down further, and they were like, okay, the camera's gonna look normal here, but we've got to make it look extra warped here so that we can literally just move the digital camera, have the background like sliding up and down and slide from this warped background to the normal background, but it was all painted as one background painting. So if we take a look down here, how this is kind of, it's really showing the warp right here. These are really kind of showing all that perspective. And then this feels a lot more normal. So in terms of like this part, if we look right here, imagining that this is the same painting, background painting, as this up here. I hope that makes sense. I think that's how it's done, but I could be wrong. Okay, so a really cool thing on this shot, I have it up here, the power of camera shake. That's what makes us feel that impact and the aliveness in the scene. And so if we take a look at it now, once we have him start to run and move, look at how much that camera's shaking. And that's leading to the feeling of, wow, this guy's running at me. And then we get that crazy fire, just like very similar to the explosion, just like boom, crazy impact frame, right? But if we imagine this not camera shaking, it's just the character running at us. It could still look cool, but part of what makes it feel so dynamic is that camera shake. So then I want to take a closer look at this little attack that Zuko's doing. So looking at the spacing down here, we've got 1 frame, 2 frames, 2 frames, 2 frames, and then multiple right here where it is like holding the main pose and like slightly changing it, but it feels like virtually the same pose. And that's for 1, 2, 3, 4 frames before we get that impact. The whole time this run, it's slightly changing, but it's very similar, right? So we feel that movement the whole way through. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, technically like 5, what feels like 5 drawings to give this transition, to really telegraph that this fire attack's happening. And if we notice, it's also really cool to track where the fire is versus his body. So the fire's kind of coming out of his hands, it's kind of trailed in the arc behind him. The hand is pointing to say like, hey, you're about to feel this. And then this is that last huge telegraph where it's like feeling brighter. We start to get the flames and then boom, crazy flame. We're gonna see a nice mirroring of this shot later on. All right, it's similar to the idea, my turn, your turn. This was Zuko's turn to shine. And so now we get Aang's turn to shine. This shot is wild. It's so cool. So just thinking about, this is 2D animation, this background is painted, and then now with that in context, try and imagine how they did this shot. Totally insane, right? And so we have like this nice movement. It feels really dynamic. And so I think that the way they did it, I think they had the first shot, and then I think they had an arced painting, and it maybe was something like this. And so I think we're seeing Aang on the rooftop. He jumps up. This is over where he's in the sky. And then we are rotating the camera, the digital camera, on like moving just the background around on it. And then we're kind of sideways, but it feels right side up because we're rotating the camera. So I know that sounds crazy, but like watch with me. All right, so we're moving up and we're already starting to rotate. And then, and it's like, and we're thinking about, try and keep your eye on where the background is and how that's rotating. So this is kind of diagonal compared to what it was. And then if we then have the clouds as a reference, the clouds are over here. So we've got the background here, and we got the clouds, but then we want to watch how they rotate. And so now the clouds that were diagonal are almost straight up, and here they are. And so these other clouds are straight up, and then they start to become diagonal, and we watch the background over here. There we go. And so I think if we go back to this mindset that we were here, we went up, we started to rotate, we kept rotating, and then it became normal. And so Aang is moving through this arc of the background, and then the camera is rotating every step along the way. All right, this shot is a really fun shot. One of the things I've noticed in some of the breakdown I'm doing is that they tend to go from these really dynamic shots to these like flat, almost like 2D video game shots. So this one right here is like 2D fighting game, right? Just very flat shot. And then we'll move to something really dynamic that is moving in a crazy way, right? So, but let's take a look at this 2D shot. It's really fun. And it's really just got like a 1, 2, 3. And that 3 is transitioning to the next shot. So it's really like 2.5. 1, 2, boom. Some fun things that I see in here. We've got Aang mostly in the same spot here. And Zuko is mostly the same drawing, just kind of moving through space. And then we have this crazy leap between this frame and this frame. Aang's just chilling, not even in the air at all. And then he moves all that distance up in the air, already using some wind, and Zuko's got his flame kick going. We just got like this fun back and forth. And if we take a look at like Aang up here, once he hits the air, he's staying in the same spot, just moving slightly for all these frames. So that's gonna feel like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 14 frames of generally being in that same area, just slowly moving to do a turn. And then same deal, just like we had the snappy moment right here, we're gonna have for Aang's turn, snappy moment. And so I just keep going back to it, but like the my turn, your turn thing is legit, at least with Avatar's animation. I'm curious to see how that shakes out with other people on other animation projects, but Aang's turn right here is actually pretty quick, and then we go straight into the next shot. My favorite part about this shot was learning, once we hit here, just keep your eye on Aang's arms and like how they move, and they're gonna actually repeat. And you would think that them repeating would be bad, but they're repeating while all this effect stuff is changing the whole way through. So if we take a look at this, see the repeating motions of the arm. It goes back to like the same 3 drawings, but the effects is changing the whole time. And so when we watch this, it feels really nice. Like if I wasn't breaking it down frame by frame, I would never have realized that. All right, this shot, I love how it's essentially like 2 actions. Maybe it feels like 3. Like 3 actions, but whenever they're changing like from here to here, that's such a stark difference. That's just 1 frame away, but it feels like, okay, you're getting up, and then it just like boom. Okay, so the getting up action is over. Now we're in the air action. We have some subtle changes with that, and then now you're in the attack wind action. But for each one of those, the change from one to the next is so snappy, and then it's gradual, then snappy, then gradual. And then fun fact here, Aang's mostly in this pose, but he's got a few frames to let his little cloak cape thing move into position and settle in. But then once he fully settles in, he's there for the rest of the shot. But the wind is changing every frame, and so it's neat to see the difference. Yeah, if you just watch that wind, it's moving every single time. And we go from this dynamic shot to, guess what? This 2D shot, like a 2D video game. This was another great economy of using less drawings. If you notice the shadow here on the pants, shadow here, and then like another shape of the cloak, it's actually just gonna alternate between two drawings, this entire shot for Aang. And his pose is the exact same. So the only thing changing is that cape and then the shadow of the pants and everything else. Now let's switch our attention to, let's just focus on the trees in the background. Trees aren't moving. Then once they move, the trees are actually gonna move in the same frame rate rhythm as Zuko. So Zuko, and I think the shadows will also be the same. It's on every other frame. All those are gonna move together. But guess what? Take a look at that wind. You notice how like even though other things are moving on 2 frames, that wind is changing every single time. And this tends to hold true for all the scenes I've seen when it comes to the wind and the fire action. So when I think about how they animated that, I think if the other stuff was pose to pose, like I've got they were probably thinking, what's my get up pose, my fly through the air pose, and then my wind attack pose. And then from there, they like smoothed out the animation. But when it comes to the wind, I think someone was just drawing each frame and just vibing it out. You know, I don't think they were doing the first frame of wind, the last frame of wind, the middle frame of wind, and like doing the ones in between. Instead, they were just like, okay, here's this frame of wind, I drew and painted it. Here's the next frame of wind, I drew and painted it. And they're just doing it straight ahead. I really do like, though, inside the wind, there's like this arc, this kind of wave arc. And then if you just watch the inside, it really is like the wave, like a wave of water almost. It's like helping make that to look like wind. So we've seen this kind of shot before. We saw it when Zuko did the flame stuff. And then we also saw where Aang was on these and then left off and did that crazy cool dynamic shot. So this is like a motif in this section. We're going back between a dynamic shot, the 2D shot, and then this kind of like running along the rooftop thing, right? So I love the storytelling in that. And then if we get into the nitty gritty, we got this full frame of like Zuko, his shirt, right? And so if we imagine where the camera is, like in real life, this would be a really hard shot to do this way, but because it's animation, here's the camera, and Zuko is essentially gonna go through the camera to like move forward. Zuko is moving through the camera, he's behind the camera, inside the camera, then in front of the camera. And then for there, we have this scene where we see him flying back. Now, these drawings do change. They're a little bit different, but just a little bit. So when it comes to like how the scene reads, we really just feel him flying back, and it reads really clearly. Boom, flying back. And I think the only other image that I'm really like holding on to is like this one, that up close face. It's not, I'm flying back, but it's not good. And then fly back. Fly. We've got the same thing. If you remember when the rooftop clip happened, we had those frames before anything happens. And that just gives us a little breathing room before we can feel the impact of something. And then wham, we feel the impact with Zuko. Now, part of what makes this feel impactful, you see the motion blur that's in here, and we see this like anguished face. This is not fun for him. And then this shot is blurring, and the camera shake is happening. So the same thing that happened with the rooftop that helps to create that impact. And then we're also feeling this pose, even though there's subtle changes. Once we're here, we're holding him against the wall with his hands for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames before we change to him like taking a breather from that wall hit, and then transitioning to like, what? I can't believe this kid did it. And so we have those 3 moments: impact, sad, surprise. So then if we see that in motion, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's got that nice rhythm of the storytelling: impact, sad, surprise. Next shot. Does this look familiar? So this is that same kind of more dynamic perspective that we had before. And then guess what? The camera pans up. And look, this is like a crazy exact mirroring of the Zuko shot. Part of me is like, did they even just use the same base models and then just like resize it and then use that to make the animation even more efficient? But then take a look, same exact deal, same thing. He's got the arms held up, arcs down, fingers up. Guess what's about to happen to you? Wind. And then huge impact frame. So cool. I love the mirroring of those 2 scenes. Then yeah, right here. So we take a look. That shot and deal right here. All right, watch this little clip here. This is a great example of my turn, your turn, where it feels like it almost doesn't even feel real. You know, like it would make sense as you go through it frame by frame, but in real time, you're like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm with it. As we slow-mo zoom into this, take a look. We got Aang doing a wind attack. Zuko sees it coming. He's like, I'm out of here. But at this point, look at Aang's eyes. He has not changed. He's still looking just where Zuko was. He hasn't even changed yet. But it's Zuko's turn, and we want the audience, we want us as the viewers to be watching two things: the wind happening, and then Zuko going on and get out of there. The focus is not on Aang in this moment. And so that's part of why this works. And we got some nice camera shake, you know. And then as Zuko's pretty much almost all the way down, it's only in this shot, this frame, when the wind's almost gone, that Zuko is heading out, and Aang finally is turning his gaze to notice that Zuko's getting away. And then Zuko's like, okay, I'm out of here. And we get this is Zuko's great action turn, and we're seeing the emotional reaction from Aang. And look how long that holds. Like, he's stunned. How'd you get away? And then he's like, okay, it's my turn to chase after you, until, oh no, storytelling frame, there's something coming. And then there's June with the crazy beast. And so it's June's turn to come up and take that. And then we move on to the next scene. Another great example of your turn, my turn. Appa has his little head moment. Then it's Aang's moment to do some running. The beast's turn to do some running. And this whole time, Appa's just staying still. And then, as the tail leaves, it's now Appa's turn again to do some movement, and then watch as I do a crazy attack. I think there's a couple things going on here. One, it's economical from a drawing standpoint to have Appa just stand there, because we got this other stuff going on that's exciting to watch. But also, I think it would have been distracting if we had Appa moving a bunch while Aang and the beast are running in front. And so, my turn, your turn. Appa, Aang, beast, tail, Appa, attack. The big thing is we can only focus on one thing at a time, and sometimes that same thing is two characters moving at the same time. Like right here, they're both moving, so we're feeling that, but it's almost like they're one. Here's this thing and it's like they're kind of like tied together, and we see them both moving in the following frames as one unit and then the next unit. But sometimes you really do need it to be your turn, my turn. So let's take a look at this one and you see what I'm talking about. So one of the things I do want to point out here is just like why you would hold different frames, different lengths. And a lot of times it's like whatever I imagine they did in like the comic book version, you know, the storyboard version of this, I think those are the ones that they're going to hold for longer. And so for this, we got Aang for 2 frames, then for 2 frames, then for 3 frames. So this one right here has 3 frames, and that's making sure we're seeing Aang leaving, and then we're making sure to see the beast being extra fearsome. Another great example of economy of drawings. Sokka's whole body is going to stay the same. Katara's whole body is going to stay the same. We're only going to see Sokka's face change, his arm change, and then her head's going to like bob up and down and emote from there. Lips is moving, arm moves, Katara's head moves slightly. We got the smoke effects happening, but even then it's like only Katara's head is moving up and down and the body's not even moving, and then Sokka is just like frozen except for his mouth. All right, for this shot I really just want you to pay attention to the spacing. This is the thing I got the most out of it. So if we take a look right here, this amount down here at the bottom that I'm flipping between on the timeline, that's 1 frame. And so you can kind of just see how big the gaps are in between those, and that's gonna kind of help you know, like, okay, hold for a couple frames, we see Aang into the frame, and this is this common pattern I've seen. We see Aang for 1 frame, and the very next frame he's doing something else, but it's gonna hold for 3. Anytime they hold for 3, I feel like that was a key storytelling pose that they probably had in storyboarding moments. Aang running right here, right? Holds for 3 frames. Then we got 2 frames here, 2 frames here, 1, and it holds for 3. 2, 2, 1, holds for 3. 1, holds for 3. Like, it's a pretty reliable pattern I'm noticing. Now this one's interesting because it holds for 3, and then we have nothing for a while. It's just the camera moving, but the background stays the same. And here's 1 frame, and then it holds for 3 because we really want to show like the beast is staying there. And then 1 frame change, holds for 3. Like, this is a really crazy scene for showing that. And then we got some, cloud movement stuff that follows a little bit of its own rules, because the panning of the background is what's really creating the interest here. So they can afford for the dust stuff to not be as changing as much, right? And then once we have Aang pop his little head up, we got him for 3 frames, but again, the camera's doing the work. So I think that's part of why they leave it in there. We want to see Aang's there. He does a 1 frame change, holds for 2. So we're starting to speed up the pacing, I think, here. 1 frame, then holds for 3. 1 frame change, holds for 3. 1 frame change, holds for 3. Like, you see, like this, it really is like, you can literally see it down here. This rhythm of right next to each other, gap, right next to each other, gap, right next to each other, gap. And that's part of what's creating this rhythm of the scene. But then we see right here, it changes. Okay, what's it changing to? 2 frames, 2 frames, 2 frames, 2 frames. But this motion doesn't feel as drastic as a change as some of these other ones. We see how much movement changing a lot. But once we get here, it's kind of like the scene is coming to a resting point. We've had our climax of the scene, this like, oh, you're gonna survive right here. And then we need a little moment of like kind of resting. It's a gradual floating down to the ground, getting into position, next scene. All right, for this one, I thought it was just really interesting how they showed the damage, but they kind of hit it with a cut. And so for this, we see this character does a turn and a move, boom, big cut right here. So technically, this could have been drawn with no background behind it. It's just literally an effects, full frame thing. But then this frame right here, the thing's already destroyed. So we already have the damage here, and then they use this part of the background was the same. Turn, run, boom. And then we have a cool mirroring. Appa turns. So it's turn, boom, turn. And so beautiful little mirroring happening in here. Great job. Okay, similar thing here. Multiple frames of just the background. I feel like this really serves as like the establishing shot for this whole next section of the fight. And so we can kind of imagine that like there's already been like these different scenes, and this is where I really started to notice this. We got the scene over here in the big courtyard area, and we explode the courtyard, and we're transitioning into our rooftop section of the fight. And so we had to do the exposition to that, which was literally landing on the rooftops, ouch. And then we're gonna fight on the rooftops for a while. And then we're gonna we need to transition out of here. So we're like, okay, new section of the fight scene, new environment. And so we're transitioning from rooftops to now, that kind of serves as like transition to this new area, right? Where the water stuff is, that is kind of the bridge scene right there. And then now we're in the well area, which almost feels like its own little fight scene. And so that was neat to see that kind of pattern, keeping the storytelling fresh by changing up the little micro scenes within the larger environment. But this was a fun, specific thing to zoom into. In order to go from, after this little, fire thing that's happening, in order to go from that to then Zuko entering the scene, he does that same thing where he kind of comes through the camera and then moves forward, but there's 4 frames that change every frame. And so I think it's because it would be kind of hard to read the motion of something that up close. So they had to give it a little bit more information and show the frames on ones. But then as we get further away, we're like, okay, I get the idea. We're running. And so they switched to 2s, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And so that was like probably a course doiling pose. And then we have 1, 1, 2, 3. And so there's that same rhythm of a 1, 1, 2, 3. I really enjoyed this shot. It's very economical. We have the background. Zuko enters the scene, holds for 3. So we're getting just his face for 3 frames. And then we have our 1, 1, 2, 3 rhythm right here. That's essentially there. So when I think about this, I wrote the notes here. Pose 3, overshoot 1, pose 3, follow 1. And so what I mean by that is, here's our pose for 3, and then we're gonna overshoot because we're gonna settle into this pose for 3 frames. And then there's 1 frame of just slightly different, but following through. And then we're on to the next scene. But like, this is like the basics of animation, beautifully done, and showing you can still use it for real awesome stories. And it really is just like here's the background drawing, then 1 drawing, 2, 3, 4. 4 drawings, and we get that whole little shot. Boom. Really cool. I didn't have too many notes on this scene, but the biggest thing I was thinking about was like they had a larger background that they were doing, and then they animated Aang within that background, but zoomed in and were able to just pan the camera around the scene. And that gives it this dynamic feel. If I remember correctly, there's some nice times here where essentially like my turn, your turn applies to the camera, and I got to solidify this learning of sometimes Aang will hold still, but it's the camera that's gonna move. Let me find out where that's gonna happen. Right here. So we have our 1 frame change from this to this, and this is gonna hold for 3 frames. But while that drawing's holding, the camera's moving, like the background's being shifted and the camera's moving, right? And then we get the character change, camera still moves. And then even though this is like 1 frame at a time, it's still like a moment of breathing before we then move into the rest. And then same deal. We have some camera movements happening even when Aang is holding, and that gives a really nice dynamic flavor to the animation. Also, I love his little face here. And then what was my note up here? Let's see, this is 1 second, 22 milliseconds, and there was 29 drawings through the whole thing. So that's pretty interesting. That's actually something I'm gonna do some more of, is figuring out how many drawings per amount of seconds on average, and then knowing the things I'm learning about when they go to 1s, 2s, 3s, and so on and forth. We got Aang enter the scene. It's very just like we had to get it done. But this is definitely a storytelling pose, right? They spent a lot of time on making his face look good, his hands look good, and it's gonna hold for 1, 2, 3 frames, and then we have our 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And so there's this good amount of time of this kind of close-up feeling of the expression of Aang, even as he moves, that's gonna register really well in our mind, even though this is going by so quick. We're still gonna feel that emotion from Aang. And then for this whole section, it's like there's a good amount of frames of just being in that little area with that, like, I'm kind of worried, but I'm also angry and ready. Before it's Zuko's turn to do some action and do some fire. And then this is really great storytelling right here, just showing off, hey, I still got her necklace, okay? So if we watch this little scene, remember Aang's face, his first one, I'm mad, I'm concerned but mad, oh crap, fire. So we got a nice 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's actually something I'm doing like while I'm playing this, is I'm like saying the rhythms out in my brain out loud. 1, 2, 3. Angry, concerned, fire. A big part of why I'm doing that is I am feeling out, I'm trying to reverse engineer how are they thinking? Like, how are they coming up with the shot? If I was doing this shot and I knew I needed to show Aang is mad, he's kind of concerned but mad, and then, oh dang, Zuko hits him with some fire and we're showing off the thing, I'm gonna feel that rhythm out. I'm gonna like act it out in real life, and I'm gonna go like, right? And it might be rough and it won't be dead on, but it'll give me a good starting point of doing that. This is a great little storytelling moment. That big pop up to the being like, what? You have Katara's necklace? Huh? And we see like how quick, again, whenever they want to make it really snappy, it's like pay attention to this next thing. They do a big jump in the movement and the spacing, and then settle into it. So this again is like, hey, just in case you missed it, we're gonna give you a whole 2 seconds of making sure that you don't miss this detail. So I think that was really important to note on the storytelling. Also, look at this pose, so good. And guess what? He literally doesn't change this pose for the whole section until then. Like, really it's just his mouth moving, and then it's only here that we're then like doing a big jump of movement, so pay attention, and then generally it's gonna move into saying, okay, moving into the next frame. In reality, it's like that feels nice and natural, but slow motion, you're like, it's not possible. They literally can't hold that character for that long. Well, guess what they do? As you can tell from the colors down here, this scene is got so much to it. It is really wild, taught me a lot. All right, the way I color these, if the marker down below is yellowish, it's Aang moving and only Aang moving. If it's blue, they're both moving at the same time. And then if it's red, Zuko's moving, but Aang isn't. Now, this isn't the kind of scene that they do every single time. This is not how the movement is, but this is a very special effect they're going for. The effect on this one is they want Aang to feel really fast and slippery and for it to be kind of humorous. And it works really well. We see there's a couple little transition movements and then Aang just locks into a pose while Zuko keeps moving. In this slow motion frame by frame aspect, it feels like Zuko is like just really bad, but it's just showing in the fast moments how slippery and tricky and airbendy, Aang is. And so let's watch that clip in real time. And we see it's really fun and kind of funny, kind of cartoony. Obviously it's all cartoons, but sometimes they're more realistic than others. And it's just really neat to see your turn, my turn in effect right here. Aang's turn together. Let's move together. And then Aang turn together, Zuko's turn. All right, it's Zuko's turn to do a thing. Hey, Aang's turn, Zuko's turn. Aang's turn, Zuko's turn. Aang, Zuko, Aang, Zuko. Super interesting shot. If I ever want to do something similar, now I know kind of how to make that happen. And I really love this shot. Might be one of my favorite shots of the whole scene. All right, if you remember back to the rooftops, we had the dynamic shots and then we would have these 2D, video game fighting scenes that are very flat. The thing I love about these 2D shots is you can get a lot of movement in, but it's easier to track for the watcher. So it's kind of a way to have almost like an active rest. Just like if you're working out, you have your crazy days and then you have, active rest days where you do something, but it's a little bit more chill. If we've gone from, even that as like the background's very stationary, so we get that, but it's different than that very dynamic angles and stuff. Then when we switch to this more flat place, it gives us a little breathing room while acting. And so this is a little more dynamic. So right here, I want you to pay special attention to these labels. I got Zuko kick, Aang kick, and so it's red, green, red, green, red, green, red, red, green, green. Okay, so there's something to that, right? So give this clip a watch. Beautiful little scene. So we got Zuko, Aang. Zuko, it's just back and forth. Like Zuko's turn, Aang leaps. Zuko leaps and attacks, Aang dodges. And then does wind. Zuko flank kicks, Aang spins around, windy thing. And then Zuko gets a double attack. 1, 2, and then Aang gets a double attack. 1, 2, which super cool. He actually does a fire right here, and then a wind, which is cool. Now this is obviously a very cool storytelling pose, but it's like Zuko's up top, he's got the power, but Aang is crouched down low, and then they're kind of alternating, and then it's like the opposite. Like this is this cool like illustration type moment, right? There's gonna be some neat mirroring that happens right after this next shot, I think. There's a lot of camera move and shake. And what I really love about this is there's a little bit of the camera movement, but if you'll notice, there's these big moves. That big move happened right there to accentuate the character's move. And then little moves, and then it's gonna do the same thing and just boom, a big camera move. And so this is like another way to utilize the camera to add to the action and like also the clarity of something so close up and interesting like this little foot dance. All right, this is a great little storytelling shot, him trying to get the necklace. And I also love just like how long this like fist pose holds while the head does a little turn. Because if we see this in real time, it's really quick, super quick shot. But we just feel Aang coming in and the movement, and then like, I'm angry, I try and get, I will get you. Ba 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 ba. And so we got the breathing room, we had our 2D shot, and then we're gonna return to our 2D shot. Timing wise, this is really interesting. This one was a longer one with a lot going on, right? But we still had our good my turn, your turn. And this one is gonna do a similar thing, my turn, your turn. But there's like a longer hold. It's almost like a mixture of the one where Aang just kind of stays for a while, but they're gonna swap turns. So this pose from Aang, his arms are moving a little bit, but he's just staying there. And then it snaps into that attack. So we really feel the attack from Zuko, kind of settle into the next one. And then it's Aang's turn. After Aang's turn, then they're gonna have this like, hey, we're both rising up to the pose, we're equals now, except this is Aang's turn to rise above Zuko. And so there's gonna be some different movement on this part, But I think an interesting way to think about this shot, the storytelling in real time, like if we look at the shot, we got our first movement, second movement, third to go into the pose. And those last like, I think this was like 10 seconds or 10 frames, where Aang is in this pose. And then it's like about 11 or so that we're in this kind of similar situation. And then we've got about 7 frames here with the pose, like moving into the pose. And then there's like, I think 18-ish where it's a couple leaping up, 8 where we're in this pose, slightly changing. And then we're here for, I think 8 more that it like finishes out the results of it. So though there's like these 4 different actions, the time spent from here is about slightly less than half of the whole shot. If we look down here, slightly less than half of the shot is devoted to the leaping off of Zuko and then him flying off, whereas the other 3 actions had to be split up in here. So if we watch it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, this shot's amazing. This one feels like slow motion, right? And why is it slow motion? It's because it's a big storytelling shot. We see that, like, we didn't know for sure. It's like maybe you missed it. It's technically, you can see it here that Aang has Katara's necklace. I didn't notice that at first. And I think they realized that. So they do this whole storytelling shot so that we see, oh dang, Aang snuck that Katara's necklace on his foot. And so there's this motion of like, okay, I got it. Now I need to do a crunch to come and grab it. And then I'm gonna flip do a little backflip thing. And then we're diving into the well. Da, 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 2, 3, 4. But it feels very slow motion. And that's very much on purpose, I believe. And then here we are, the final shot of what I wanted to show you guys. And the coolest thing right off the bat on this final shot, if we look at the average like length of some of these shots, like this one is a long one, this one's fairly long. This last shot is 10 whole seconds. All right, let's break this one down. First, I just want to show you, what if we were to just see like the key storytelling poses? So I just kind of blocked out where I think those were, like where I think they would have maybe drawn the certain drawings in the storyboard. First shot, we see, okay, Aang is flying down the well. Zuko is going up to attack. He throws it down the well. He's like, yeah, I got you, boy. And then, things didn't go the way he wanted. Water flows up, knocks him back. We see a victorious Aang backflip in, land. It's starting to rain, which is really dramatic and cool. It stopped, and then wham, Zuko smacks on the ground, and this is the resolution of the scene. So I really think like those are like the story. When I reverse storyboard this little scene, this is what I imagine the comic version would have been. And then I think from there, they're able to go in and do the animation. I could be wrong, but that's how I'm thinking about it. But if we start to like kind of watch it through slower, we see some of the places where the movement jumps and it's just kind of showing some cool things. The camera moving up and down with Zuko. Some great rumble and camera shake with the blur. This nice wave effect of the water. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, those are like the same drawings, just kind of repeated, but the camera shake is helping to tell the story of it. So yeah, that's really economical. All that water is just the same. That's a great shot. And then Aang just holds in that pose for the whole time. Feels so cool as the rain starts to go really intense. And then it calms down. And all that space in between before like, goof, Zuko has really hit that impact and the scene is over. Thank you so much for watching through this with me, learning some lessons on animation. and on fighting. So yeah, that's my breakdown of this fight scene between Aang and Zuko. It's so fun and learned so much. I hope it was interesting to you and that you learned some cool things along the way as well. Let me know down in the comments what you learned the most, what things stuck out to you that you're like, wow, I'm gonna use that. If you're a fellow animator, or if you just are a fan of animation, what kind of surprised you the most? What was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. This is the longest video I've ever made. So Final Credits Club, if you've made it this far, you are a real one, and I am crazy appreciative of you. You're the absolute freaking best. Leave a comment and incorporate some reference to like a monkey or something. And then I'll know you made it to the end, and I can especially send my love and good vibes your way. As for me, this recording has been 1 hour and 45 minutes long, though it'll be less that you're watching. So as for me, that's it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a great one. Bye.